Hi, and welcome to episode 74 of the Breaking Bio podcast. I'm Morgan Jackson, a PhD student at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada.
I'm Heidi Parker. I'm a postdoc at the University of Texas in Austin.
And today we're talking about birds, and specifically some pretty weird-looking birds that I think everybody is familiar with. And to tell us all about those, we've got Chris Torres, who is a PhD student at the University of Texas in Austin. Chris,
Hi.
you want to say hi? Yeah, there we go.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I am a first-year PhD student here at the University of Texas. And I study flamingos using both paleontology and genetics, so I'm interested in flamingo fossils and DNA.
So when you were a kid, did you love dinosaurs? Is that what brought you to paleontology? Or were you just like diehard flamingos from the start?
No, flamingos are an acquired taste. Yeah, I think everybody starts out as kind of a dinosaur lover, and then I think the origin story for most paleontologists is that they were into dinosaurs as a kid and then just never stopped. And I was of course into dinosaurs as a kid, but then I think at some point I forgot, which is a really depressing sentence. I forgot that I was into dinosaurs, and so when it came time for me to pick my bachelor's, I picked poorly and I went with law because I forgot about dinosaurs. And then as an undergrad, I took this super awesome Intro to Dinosaurs class because I needed a science, and it basically changed my life. And I remembered dinosaurs are pretty cool. So I changed majors basically on the spot from law to geology so I could go into paleontology. And then the scientist who taught the course and I ended up doing research for was Julia Clark, an avian paleontologist and this was at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, which is where I grew up. And then she left there to come here to UT, and then she got me hooked on birds, and I kind of stuck with birds, and then I kind of got into flamingos just because they're really interesting. And then I ended up here at UT working for her again, now as her PhD student.
All right, so flamingos all the way. So you recently went to a conference that was all flamingos all the time.
Yes, the third International Flamingo Symposium, which is pretty awesome. It's basically just like a room of like 100 people talking about 6 species, which was super cool. And it's the third one, even though I think the first one was in the 80s, and the second one, I want to say, was in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I think on average, it's like one meeting every 20 or 15 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't believe that there's 100 people working on 6 species of flamingos. That's
It's actually
ridiculous.
pretty awesome. It was actually a great combination of, so there was scientists who work on these things and study them, and then there were a bunch of zookeepers and people who interact with them like on a daily basis, but not really on a scientific level, just like talking about, so they came and they were just having discussions on like what makes flamingos happy and what's the best way to raise them and care them and move them and what kind of enclosures do they like and what shape and do they interact with everything. It was actually way more technical than I expected. So yeah, between scientists and people who just work at zoos and raise them, there's a lot of people who work on flamingos. It was pretty cool.
Well, that makes sense. I guess you see flamingos pretty well at all the parks and zoos that you go to because they're a fairly charismatic bird, not only in their shape but of course in their bright plumage.
Yes.
So for those, I mean, maybe we should back up. I assume everybody knows what a flamingo is, but perhaps they don't know the details of what makes a flamingo a flamingo. They may not even know that there are 6 species. They may all just assume that there is just one. So can you give us a little bit of an overview on of what a flamingo is and what they do?
Sure. Yeah. So flamingos are birds. They're very pink, and most people aren't familiar with the fact that there are 6 species. Usually, you just think of a pink bird. But there are 6 species, and they are super similar to each other physically, which is not surprising because flamingos are really, really highly specialized. They're highly adapted to the environments they live in. Anytime somebody pictures a flamingo, it's basically this really bright pink bird, long legs, long neck, and a really funny bill. And what I found is that most people can picture a flamingo, and they recognize a flamingo instantly. But beyond the color and the legs and the neck, they don't really understand why flamingos are so recognizable. They know they're recognizable, but not necessarily why. And a big part of it has to do with their bill. They've got these crazy down curved beaks that basically look like an upside down smile, which is where Gould got the title for that really incredible book of essays he has, The Flamingo Smile. So flamingos are really highly adapted. They're really highly specialized. They're filter feeders, which I think a lot of people don't really think about, but they're really highly specialized filter feeders. And everything that makes a flamingo is directly related to the way that they feed, which basically defines flamingo life. And they feed by standing in lakes, and they drop their heads completely upside down into the water, and they use their tongues as pumps, and they draw water into and out of their mouth. And their mouths are aligned with these keratinous lamellae. They're these little keratinous comb-like structures on the margins of their bills, and they act like a filtration mesh. So they bring water in, water goes out, and these lamellae capture these food items, which then they eat. And so everything about flamingo anatomy is basically revolves around that feeding. They've got the long legs and long neck so they can stand in water and drop their head upside down. Their bills are curved so they can interact with the water more easily, and they're pink because of the things that they eat. The things that they eat have these carotenoids, these pigment molecules that they break down, metabolize, and deposit in their feathers. So flamingos are really recognizable, and they're really highly specialized, which is why I'm so interested in them, because they inherently have a really cool evolutionary story to kind of investigate.
Are the species so similar? Like, can you tell the species apart by sight?
Yeah, I mean, if you have them next to each other, they're very diagnostic. People think of a flamingo and they think pink, and actually, there's only one species of the 6 who's actually basically solid pink. It's for Americans, or I guess North Americans, it's this one really bright red flamingo that most people think of when they see a flamingo at a zoo. But most of them are actually kind of some shade of lighter pink and some white with only regions of pink. So you can tell them apart based on the coloration. You can tell them apart based on their bill, and you can tell them apart based on how tall they are. The smallest flamingo is only half the size of the tallest flamingo. So if you put them next to each other, you can probably tell them apart. And if you show someone who's only seen a really bright red one of the kind of white ones, they'll probably tell that something looks different. But they all have the same basic flamingo ingredients, with the legs, the neck, the pink, and that crazy bill.
So there's 6 species. Are they all New World? Do they all live, in the Caribbean basin there, or how widely spread are flamingos?
There's actually only one species that really lives in the Caribbean area, appropriately named the Caribbean flamingo, or alternatively the American flamingo. There are 4 species. 4 of the 6 live in the New World. 3 live in South America. 1 lives in Central America, which is the bright red one. And then there are 2 that are in the Old World. 1 primarily around the Mediterranean, and then kind of heads down into Africa, and then one's primarily in Southern Africa, and then those 2 kind of meet towards the middle there.
So do you work only with dead flamingos?
Mostly with dead flamingos. So my research is both paleontological and genetic in nature, and typically those 2 are kind of mutually exclusive. You can't really do genetics on fossils. But I do research that's firmly in one or the other, and then it kind of comes together. So most of my research right now is in dead flamingos, fossil flamingos that have been extinct for tens of millions of years. But I do a lot of genetics work as well, which of course can only be done on the living flamingos. So I've done a lot of phylogenetics work, trying to figure out how flamingos are related to each other, and then I've done a lot of divergence dating work to try to figure out how long ago the living species first appeared and first split from each other. So the paleo work is entirely extinct flamingos. Genetics work is entirely living flamingos.
What's the closest living relative to a flamingo? Is this a stupid question?
No, it's actually a really good question, because the answer is super surprising. So for bird relationships in general have been investigated for hundreds and hundreds of years in a scientific context, in a non-scientific context for thousands. So historically, flamingos have been the relationships with flamingos have been investigated using non-genetic data, since we didn't really have access to genetics. So skeletal morphology, bill, beak, plumage, behavior, ontogeny, how they develop through life. And so in the past, they've been stuck with other birds with long legs and long necks, like storks or cranes, herons, egrets. The favorite had been egrets and herons, just based on morphological similarity. And that had been assumed to be true for many hundreds of years. And the data supporting that was really good because skeletally they're quite similar. But genetics changed everything. And in 2001, my master's advisor, the guy I did my master's with at University of North Carolina at Wilmington, found that flamingos are actually most closely related to a group of birds called the grebes, which are really small birds. They live on water. They look a lot like loons. They are super highly adapted to swimming. They actually are so adapted to swimming that their legs are at the very back of their body instead of the middle, which means they basically can't walk if they're on land. They're basically helpless. And so they're totally different from flamingos, which was a massive surprise. And we've only known that they're related to flamingos for the past 10 or 15 years. And so it's kind of given us a whole new context within which to study the evolution of both groups, because it was such a massive surprise, and it means that they both came from some relative that looks totally different from what we expected that relative to look like. So it's actually a really good question.
Do flamingos, like extinct flamingos, do you find like some kind of intermediate between the grebes and the flamingo?
Kind of, and that's been a major point of research. A focal point of research is trying to figure out what did the flamingo look like before it looked so ridiculous.
Or so awesome.
Both. Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive. So it's kind of weird. There are actually two groups of flamingos, and one group is completely extinct, and the other group is the ones that we know of right now. But the fully extinct group also had long legs, also had long neck, not quite as tall as the living flamingos, but proportionally still very long. But their bill was vastly different. Instead of having this crazy, so living flamingos have this crazy downturned bill, and it's basically adapted to being upside down. The lower bill is massive compared to a really tiny upper bill. The upper bill fits into the lower bill instead of the lower bill fitting into the upper bill, which is generally what you think of when you think of jaws. So it's basically super adapted to being upside down and to filter feeding. And this extinct group does not have either of those features. It's very straight, fairly blunt, kind of short. So it's totally unlike the living flamingos. So people thought that must be some kind of intermediate group because it's got the long legs, the long neck of the living flamingos, but it's got this kind of straight, blunt bill that kind of looks like the living grebes. So it seemed like a kind of a perfect mixture of the two. But now some research is being done that's suggesting that actually this extinct group may not really truly be indicative of the ancestral condition for flamingos. It might actually be specialized in a completely unexpected direction, which is complicating things, and it's really inconvenient because it was actually a really convenient intermediary. So we still don't fully understand what the primitive flamingo looked like, but there's a really good chance it at least had long legs and a long neck. We don't know what the mouth looked like, which is really the interesting part.
Yeah.
Stupid science getting in the way of a good story.
I know,
Yeah.
It's the worst.
That's really interesting. It's great because you're just starting your PhD, but you've really like hit the ground running with this project.
Yeah, this is all stemmed from my master's. So I did my bachelor's in geology from North Carolina State University, and then I spent 3 years working on my master's at University of North Carolina at Wilmington, investigating flamingos. So all of this came from my master's, working with Marcel Van Tunen, who's a molecular phylogeneticist. And so, yeah, we were able to pull together this really cool project that accomplished what I really want to do with my career, which is blending paleontological work and genetics work, which usually are kind of incompatible, but kind of blending them to get at kind of a single general evolutionary question from two very different directions, and kind of putting together a comprehensive answer that you would not have been able to come up with only focusing on one of those two fields.
Interesting. Do you have a huge collection of flamingo bric-a-brac?
Yeah, but not on purpose. So flamingos since flamingos are so characteristic, they're so well known that as soon as you tell someone that you work on something like flamingos, people buy flamingo stuff, whether you want it or not. So I do have some flamingo stuff, and it's kind of randomly set around my apartment. So my apartment is very much like a Where's Waldo of flamingos. You can try to spot the flamingo stuff, and it's not very hard because it's bright pink, and it's the only bright pink stuff that I have. So I do have a lot of flamingo stuff, which I like. I have a plastic flamingo that I normally keep right outside my apartment door, kind of as like a gatekeeper or something. So yeah, I do have, against my will, quite a bit of flamingo stuff.
I mean, there's no way around it. I have tons of frog stuff. It's the easiest gift to get you. So.
Yeah, and it's not even just flamingo stuff. It's pink stuff. Like someone bought me like a bright pink, like bedazzled stapler, and they only bought it because it's pink. And I have a lot of breast cancer stuff, which is a great cause. I'm glad they spent the money on it because that money went to presumably the research. But I've got a lot of pink stuff that's pink because of breast cancer, but they bought it because of flamingos. Actually, my favorite pen is a breast cancer pen, so it works out pretty well sometimes.
That's pretty awesome.
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. What is your favorite species of flamingo? It can be dead. It's fine. I mean, it can be extinct.
Obviously, it's dead.
Yeah.
So right now, I've got kind of a pet taxon that I am. So I've got a paper coming out very soon where we describe some brand new skull material from 25 to 30 million years ago in France, and it's a taxon that's really important for understanding how flamingos have evolved. So the flamingos that have a really crazy bill are part of a family called Phenacopteridae. And this is the earliest known phenacopterid, which means it's the earliest known flamingo that's got this crazy bill. And it was first described from a really remarkably well-preserved specimen in 1852, but that specimen is now completely missing, and no one has any idea where it is, and no one has seen the skull or any skull like it in the time since. So for 150, 160 years, no one's had any clue what it looked like. But we're putting out a paper where we, for the first time, describe new material from this skull. So we're putting out a paper that basically redefines what this taxon looked like. And so, since it's kind of my pet taxon, I'll choose that as my favorite.
So, did you guys rediscover the missing skull, or did you find new material that you're matching up as being the same or close to the same as the missing skull?
Yeah, so it's actually a ridiculous story about how we came across all this stuff, and it's actually kind of a really scary story if you're someone who counts on, who just assumes that things are curated properly, which normally they are. Normally they are. Museums are fantastic, but every once in a while something goes wrong, and so that's kind of what happened with us. Things went wrong in the best possible way. So. To answer your question, it's totally new material. It's not the same stuff. That fossil is still completely missing. So when I first started this project and I got into the paleo stuff, of course I was interested in this other group of flamingos that doesn't have the crazy bill. I was interested in the straight ones. And of that group, there's only two known, well-preserved skulls, basically two skulls with the upper bill and the cranium. The lower bill has only been first reported this year, actually. So when I was getting into this, there were only these two skulls. Both of them were in France. And so there was this big avian paleontology meeting in Europe. My advisor and I went, and so we decided to take some time out to go to France and check out these fossils. So we get there, and we get to the collections, and the collections manager pulls out this fossil, and of course me and my advisor are just losing our minds over it because it's beautiful, it represents all this really cool evolutionary data, and it's so important, so we're just losing our minds. And so the collections manager sees how excited we are, and he's all into it because we're into it, and so he's like, oh, if you like that, check out this one. So he shows us a picture on his computer of what he thinks is another specimen of the same species that's never been described before, but he's wrong. It's not the same species. It's actually very clearly a member of the group of flamingos that do have the down-curved bill, but it's from the same time period, which means it can only be this one taxon where the skull is missing or something that's really closely related. So as soon as we saw it, we lost our minds all over again because this one's super important, but it's never been described, and it's the earliest known member of this other group. And so it was on display, actually. He had to take it off of display so he could show us. And it was labeled this other species. And so immediately we knew that we needed to redescribe it because it was super important. It tells us all about what this extinct first known member of Phaenicopteridae looked like. And then in the process, and so it was the beautifully preserved skull. It was the skull and part of the upper bill. The rest of the upper bill and the lower bill was completely missing. And so we got all into this fossil, and so we started sending out emails to other collections managers finding out what they had. And it turned out in various other collections, the rest of the skull could be represented. It wasn't from the same individual, but it was material that basically built up, represented the rest of the skull, the rest of the upper bill, the rest of the lower bill. And so across all these specimens, we were able to reconstruct what this skull looked like 25 to 30 million years ago. So that's a really long answer to no, it's new material, but we've known about it for a really long time. We just didn't realize how important it was until recently.
I love that. I love that something that everybody was looking for 150 years. There was one literally sitting out for everybody to see on display, and just went unnoticed because the right people didn't walk through the right room at the right time.
That happens. Like you'll walk through and see something that strikes something with you, and it just takes the right person in the right place at the right time, looking at the right things to realize what they've got. And fortunately, it worked out pretty well.
Was the museum guy pretty bummed out, or was he just glad that you figured out it was something cool?
Oh, I'm sure he's excited. I mean, so he was getting into the fact that my advisor and I were super excited. Like he was really into it, which I think is a good quality for a collections manager. Like you want them to be as excited about your research as you are, so that they'll be super receptive to it. And he was, which is fantastic. We were really happy about that. So I think he was really excited about it. And yeah, so I don't think he was embarrassed by the fact that it was mislabeled or anything. I think he's really excited to find out that they actually have a super important fossil that they didn't realize that they had.
That's really cool. So do you think you would have found this missing fossil if you had gone into it and had kept your cool with your advisor and just been like, no big deal, just another specimen to add to our list? Or do you think your enthusiasm and the way that you spread what you like to do to this collection manager, brought up that, hey, we've got this other thing hanging out in the hallway?
I like to think we would have found it otherwise, but I have no clue. But I'm glad it worked out the way it did. I'm glad he was so receptive, and now it was a fantastic discovery. And something else very similar happened the next year, so it's going to result in another publication on another new flamingo skull. So it keeps happening, which is great. So as long as we keep staying this lucky, we'll be very happy.
You'll be known. They're like, oh shit, Chris is coming. Let's give him the mislabeled stuff because it's here. Doing everyone publishing papers and doing all the museums this service.
Yeah, it's. I think it works out for everybody.
Awesome. And so we're getting close to the end of the time here, but I just wanted to ask your opinion. So you've got 6 species alive to work on, sort of, and you've been doing some molecular work on those.
Yep.
And you've got, untold number, because nobody's labeled them correctly, of, hidden flamingos waiting in drawers and cabinets at natural history museums and collections. What are you going to do for the rest of your career? Because it seems like, if you're pushing the taxonomy and phylogenetic side, you're running out of material pretty quickly here.
Kind of. So we're answering a lot of questions on the molecular side. That's definitely for sure. But the molecular stuff keeps coming up with new questions for the paleo stuff. So we have, for the paleo stuff for flamingos, we have a ton of questions. We've got a lot of fossils that need to be described, and we've got other fossils that need to be redescribed, or at least reassessed So like I was talking about, this grebe relationship for flamingos is very new. And just the fact that flamingos are related to grebes has brought up a lot of questions about the early species. And so these are all questions that need to be answered. So there's plenty of work to do there. But for my PhD, I'm still working out what I might work on. I definitely want to stick with birds. Definitely want to stick with paleo and genetics because it's been good to me so far. But I kind of want to extend a bit outside of flamingos and start working on other groups that also need work done. So something I like doing is taking a molecular context to a paleontological question. And there are a lot of groups that are being studied in a paleontological context, but really don't have a strong molecular context. And so I would like to build up a lot of that stuff and look at maybe some larger groups that have a lot of unanswered molecular questions that could really deserve some digging into. So on the genetics questions, flamingos, there's not. There's always a lot of questions left, but there's a lot of other questions in other groups that I'd really like to touch on. So that's what I expect to work on next is still keep with flamingos, but start working on some new stuff as well.
That's good. I know that the molecular techniques have been pretty much revolutionizing the bird world, like you found out recently with the grebes, and that's happening all over the bird tree of life, from what I understand. So I'm sure there's plenty to do there. So how many bird fossils, like when we hear about fossils, everybody's first thought is dinosaurs, but how well represented in the fossil record are birds or birds that we would recognize as something closely related to what we could go out back and see today?
Yeah, very well represented. You're right, dinosaurs get definitely the lion's share of attention. But yeah, birds are very well represented. Not as well represented as other groups of terrestrial vertebrates, just by nature. Since birds fly, it's hard for them to... The likelihood of them dying in the perfect place for fossilization, not really great. And bird bones are generally rather fragile, so it's easy for them to get destroyed. So for them to last in the fossil record, it takes a lot. So there are a lot of fossils. The fossil record is very well known, and especially with the crown clade of birds or birds that are still alive, there are quite a few species represented, a lot. So for flamingos, for example, there's 6 living species, but for Phainopteridae, which is the family of curved-billed flamingos, there may be upwards of 18 species in the fossil record. And then the non-curved flamingos, maybe another 16. So in terms of the living groups, the birds that we see today very frequently only represent a very small proportion of known species through time. So the fossil record is actually really, really well represented.
Yeah. Awesome. So I think we're going to have to wrap it up here. We're pretty much out of time. Where can people follow along with the work you're doing and all this flamingo jazz, as well as your next steps?
Yeah, so we have a phylogenetics paper out right now where we talk about how flamingos are related to each other. That's out in BMC, Evolutionary Biology. It's open access. Anyone can get to it. And then we've got this fossil paper coming out very soon, where we're going to describe this really cool new skeletal stuff that's coming out hopefully within the next few months, and that'll be at Organisms, Diversity, and Evolution. Unfortunately, I don't really do a lot of social outreach yet. We'll see if Heidi can get me into all that stuff.
What's your first step?
For now, yeah, I'm on ResearchGate, Academia, Google Scholar. So find Chris Torres. Chris R. Torres is how I publish. Yeah, and everything pops up there.
And
awesome.
If people, we can always add a link to, people can email you and get your home address to send
yes,
flamingo memorabilia.
Please. Strange pink stuff. I love getting that.
As hot pink as you can get with as many rhinestones as you can get.
It's got to catch the light. Yeah, it's got to be fabulous to make it into my collection.
Flamingo shape not required. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you, Chris, very much for coming on and talking to us today about all your research. And for everybody listening at home, we'll put links up to Chris's papers as well as some of the other stuff we've talked about today on our website, which is at breakingbio.com. And as well as if you have questions about flamingos or whatever else that we can pass along to Chris, you can contact us on Twitter at Breaking Bio. You can find us on Facebook by searching for the Breaking Bio podcast. And you can also find us on iTunes if you want to take us with you and listen in the car or on your walk to work. That's it for this week, but we'll hope you'll listen again next week.